The Common Groundwater podcast is brought to you by CalSec, an international company headquartered in Kalamazoo that provides expertly crafted ingredients that help food and beverages look better, taste better, and last longer, all naturally. CalSec has set aggressive goals to send zero waste to landfills by 2030 and to create net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. You can learn more at calsec.com. Hey folks, you are tuning into Common Groundwater, a podcast by the Michigan Environmental Council, where we talk about issues felt across the state widely and deeply, and we look at the stories about them and the solutions to them. I'm Bo Brockett, your host, and joining me today for the second episode in a row is a newcomer to the podcast, Trent Wolf, our Strategic Campaigns Director. Welcome, Trent.
Hey everybody, nice to be with you, Bo.
Yeah, nice to be with you. So we're kind of in a streak right now in the podcast series where we're following up on issues that we talked about last year. Last episode I talked with Reese about some water protection updates. You and I are here to talk recycling updates, particularly around Michigan's bottle deposit system. We've had some episodes in the past about this, and I'm excited to check in with you on them all. Before we begin, though, I've started out each Bottle Bill series in our A Better Bottle Bill podcast mini-series with drink-related questions. Mine for you. Given that we work in a political space, a little bit of policy space, there's a little bit of drinking involved. Sometimes you got to schmooze or you have to celebrate a big win. What is your favorite alcoholic beverage?
I think my favorite alcoholic beverage would probably be an IPA of some kind.
Okay, there we go. I got to be honest, I am not a huge IPA fan. I must have just been stuck on like the low shelf beer and haven't moved on too much. No, I do like some nicer craft beers. I'm like a wheat beer guy. The go-to drink, it's not a Michigan brand, but I always like a Blue Moon. It's like my favorite, just a little citrusy.
That's my wife's favorite.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
If there's not an IPA available, I'll probably take a Blue Moon if I can. So.
Yeah, nice, a drink for any occasion. So, as I kind of alluded to at the start of the episode, a few minutes back, this is our next episode in our A Better Bottle Bill mini-series. In episode 1, we talked about Michigan's bottle deposit system and how it came to be. How people will, buy a can or bottle or buy a drink, pay a little bit extra for it, return it, and then get a little bit of that money back. And then in episode 2, I talked with our boss, Conan Smith, about the Environmental Council's vision for a better bottle bill. What we want, how we want this system that's historically worked super well to be even better, to fit the times. You and I are here for a bit of a contextualization of sorts. We're going to put all that big talk into practice a little bit. Before we do, though, I would love to spend a bit of time with you as a Strategic Campaigns Director, someone very intimately involved in this. Could you give us a little bit of a broad brushstrokes overview as to what our vision for a better bottle bill is? Yeah,
definitely. And as you know, Michigan's bottle bill was passed in 1976 via ballot initiative. And since then, over the last 20 years, there have been actually a lot of attempts to modernize the bottle bill. But because the original proposal was passed via a ballot initiative, it requires a 3/4 vote in the legislature. Mm-hmm. So for 20 years, legislators have been introducing proposals to modernize it for better or worse in different circumstances. But none of them have been able to get traction because of that high threshold that it takes to get through the legislature. And within this context, the Michigan Environmental Council has been working really hard over the last probably 5 or 6 years to try and bring this to fruition, taking a proposal to the legislature to get something on the ballot or passed out straight through the legislature. Within this context, the Michigan Environmental Council has 2 really key priorities that we're interested in when it comes to the bottle bill. One is expanding the law to cover virtually all consumer containers under 1 gallon. Mm-hmm. The current law, as it was written, only applies to carbonated beverages, beer, and like malt drinks. But a water bottle, Gatorade bottle, any sort of non-carbonated beverage isn't included with that. And the second reason is that we want to make it easier and more convenient for consumers to be able to take these containers back. We've been operating under the same, return to retail process where consumers have to go in and individually return their containers in for decades now, while other states have been able to modernize their system so that it's much easier, much more convenient. People don't have to deal with the sticky cans. In some places, you can just literally drive up and drop your bag of cans in a dumpster, and they'll electronically send you your deposit money. So me as a consumer, these are things that I would really like to see in Michigan's bottle deposit system. But and they're things that MEC and many other stakeholders have been trying to implement over the last 20 or 30 years. But we just haven't been able to get that done. And why we want to do this is incredibly important too. Specifically, Michigan led the nation in recycling for almost 50 years as a result of our bottle bill. We processed over 144 billion containers in that time span. Almost 95% of all beverage containers that were sold from 1978 to now were recycled through our bottle bill system, which ensured that those cans and bottles were then repurposed back into recycled materials, most likely another can or a bottle. But since the COVID-19 pandemic, Michigan's redemption rates have slid considerably. For 40 years, we had an over 90% redemption rate. Now that's about 70%. And that has resulted in hundreds of millions, if not billions of cans not returning to that closed loop system to where they will be turned into another product. One reason for this decline that, this is something that's being studied by the University of Michigan and some other researchers, but one of the reasons we think this decline has happened is in part as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which really altered the way in which a lot of consumers engage in grocery shopping. A lot of folks now will do the curbside pickup or do online ordering and that sort of thing, where their actual lived experience of walking into that grocery store is much different now. So maybe they don't actually take those cans in, and maybe they're just staying in their garage, or maybe they're throwing them in the recycling can, hopefully. And another reason for this, and probably more impactful than just the broader changes in the economy, is that when the original law was passed, it allowed retailers to only accept cans or bottles that they sold. And let's go back to 1978, there weren't as many brands of manufacturers, and there definitely weren't as many retailers. But now, I went to the grocery store the other day to return our bottles, and we came home, we went with 4 bags and we came back with an entire bag because we couldn't return those at Meijer, because Meijer didn't sell them. They're from Costco or Trader Joe's or something like that. And this is, in my opinion, one of the driving factors that have resulted in a reduced redemption rate, because people want a system that's easy and convenient. They don't want a system where they have to drive around town and go to 6 different grocery stores just to make sure they return all of their cans. And so we think that that's another big reason why the bottle deposit law, or bottle returns, have kind of gone down in the last 5 or so years. And to maybe to layer in some data to this conversation too is MLive did a report earlier this year, and that report said that Michiganders threw about $500 million away of recyclable material, and within that $130 million worth of bottle deposits. So obviously those are cans that aren't going back into the recycling system. So you see these huge shifts in consumer behavior and in products that are now available to consumers, in the way in which consumers and industry kind of interact with that. And so to us, where are these cans going, right? If our estimation is that there's about 4 billion cans currently in the bottle bill system that get a deposit on them. Our estimates have that going up to about 7 billion cans once we include water bottles, Gatorade bottles, all these other types of bottles that aren't currently included. So it begs the question of what's happening to those now, right? And we can kind of see it. If you go to your local park, you walk down a street, you go enjoy a river or Great Lakes, what do you see there? You see water bottles, plastic material, containers that aren't covered by the deposit. You may see a beer can laying around, but you can be pretty sure that someone's going to come pick that up and return it because it's 10 cents.
Yep.
And we see that regularly, right? You know, if you're someone that goes canoeing or tubing down any of Michigan's rivers, you know, there's tons of people that are out there drinking all types of different containers, but the ones you see left are the ones that aren't deposited. And the environmental impact from that is staggering, right? You know, we have plastic pollution of the Great Lakes that is now turning into this microplastics crisis that, you know, I think we all have like a credit card's worth of plastic inside of us. And these water bottles and other plastic type of containers are a direct result of that, right? If they're not being recycled, they're being left out in our environment and corroding and turning into smaller and smaller pieces of plastic. So to us, it's vitally important that we make sure that all containers are included in here so that we are ensuring that this plastic material gets recycled into new materials. And the real power of the system that we have created with our current bottle bill is this kind of book-ended system where personal responsibility and industry responsibility are supported by an economic incentive, right? We told industry that they have a responsibility when this law was passed to implement this system. And we told consumers that they had a responsibility to return their containers if they wanted to get their 10 cents back. And that sense of personal responsibility and kind of industry or corporate responsibility are so vital to the way in which the bottle bill works. And that's why we want to expand it to these other containers too, because we don't need a big government apparatus to make sure the system works. By the very nature of the incentives we have within the system, it's allowed to kind of carry out itself that way. Now we do need support and money for building out recycling infrastructure to cover or to be able to process this massive growth and the amount of recycled material that we'll have. But when it comes to like the actual incentives within the system, like that's why you have water bottles in rivers, but not Bud Light cans, right? And lastly, I would say like the big reason why we want to modernize Michigan's bottle deposit system is that it's a successful program that people support, right? It's not very often you find any issue where Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people from the Upper Peninsula and Traverse City and Alpena all the way down to Monroe and Detroit and out west to Kalamazoo all support Michigan's bottle bill. You know, poll after poll has it above, 70% support. But we need to improve it in a way that allows people to engage with it, that meets their needs and their interests, so it delivers results for everybody in the way that best fits their lived experience. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that if there is a program that currently exists, like the bottle bill, and people support it, that we work with everybody in the state, all the consumers, to understand what their frustrations are so that we can modify and modernize the bottle bill so that it can actually meet those needs, right?
Yeah. What I love about the Environmental Council's proposal for a better bottle bill, and that other stakeholders have advocated for too, is just how holistic it is in its thinking and how grounded it is also in just, to a point you made earlier, like in people's lived experiences. This isn't us putting forth some proposal that we haven't run past the citizenry, that we haven't run past the folks who are part of this sort of recycling process. It's very all-encompassing in its approach. Even when we ran a little petition signing campaign for a topic that we can get into a little bit later, but folks across the state responded, and what I thought was particularly enlightening was people were all excited about expanding this system. They were like, this needs to be done. Why don't we haven't done this before? But they were also very honest too overall about this kind of stinks right now, having to go to multiple places to recycle bottles and cans, not being able to recycle the things that we buy often, something like a sports drink or a water bottle. It seems like people are also ready for this more multifaceted, more holistic approach to the bottle deposit system. All that to say, though, that in the few months since we launched our last few episodes around A Better Bottle Bill, the mini-series, we've had to play some defense of sorts around this issue. and perhaps you weren't necessarily expecting to do so.
As in the case in legislating.
yes, that is the life of politics. So for folks who are tuning in, like if you've are following political news, you might have seen that a bottle deposit upgrade was proposed this legislative session, and that we had to take a stronger stance or more wary stance against it. Could you explain a little bit about why we made that stance, what the sort of thing at play was here?
We were working with Senator McCann for most of last term on putting together a proposal. Ultimately, we opposed Senator McCann's version of the bottle bill, even though it supported or included a few provisions that we supported, like universal redemption and expansion to almost all consumer containers. The way that the proposal was put together, in our view, wasn't one that would actually be successful. It failed to fully provide funding for recycling infrastructure, while diverting over $100 million to corporate interests. And now, I even said in my testimony opposing the legislation that we're not necessarily opposed to those business stakeholders that are engaged in the bottle bill to receive some sort of funding to make sure that they can implement it. But at the end of the day, the proposal that was put forward was one that would shift $100 million of unclaimed deposits from programs that benefit people and communities to the pocketbooks of these corporate stakeholders without any guarantees that the bottle bill system would be improved with infrastructure investments therein.
Yeah.
Our version of the bottle bill is one that takes the unclaimed deposits and invests in environmental cleanup programs, invests in water security, but primarily invests in the recycling infrastructure that would make this program be successful, right?
I do want to step back real quick and talk a little bit about the funding mechanism you spoke about, and that's like the unclaimed deposit. Now, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or expand on this, but the bottle deposit system runs by us feeding our dimes into it, right? Like we buy a bottle or a can that can be returned through our bottle deposit system, and we pay 10 cents per can or bottle for it. Once we return a bottle or can, we get that 10 cents back. But for those people who buy, say, a Faygo and then don't return it again, that 10 cents kind of becomes unclaimed. And that's the funding structure that can help power improvements to our bottle deposit system. The government, or like the state, takes those extra dimes that are unclaimed and then uses them to improve the system or to clean up the environment. Is that a correct assessment there?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, the way I would describe it is as an unclaimed deposit is the leftover dimes for those people that don't return their cans back to a machine at the store.
You're a communicator, much better than I am.
So if you're someone who like puts your can in your curbside recycling, you're not getting your 10 cent back for that. So that's an unclaimed deposit, right? If you're someone who, God forbid, throws your can in like a dumpster or like on the side of the road, that's also an unclaimed deposit. That money exists in a fund called the Unclaimed Deposit Fund that the state collects from the businesses that sold them. They get all the receipts of the sales, and then all of the people that return the cans, there's receipts for the number of returns. And the difference of that is the unclaimed deposits. Currently, 75% of those unclaimed deposits go to support contaminated site cleanup. 25% of those funds go back to retailers to reimburse them for costs associated with managing the program. But that's not how the original bottle bill was actually passed. The original bottle bill didn't have 25% of the sheets going to the retailers. That was passed later on, and I think it was in like the late 80s, I believe. So the original version of the bottle bill had 100% of the sheets. The unclaimed sheets is another word for unclaimed deposit, going to support environmental cleanup programs. And so in modern terms, that means that in 2023, there was $105 million in unclaimed deposits. And that's obviously a direct result of the declining redemption rate that we have. For many decades, that was in the millions of dollars. But after the pandemic hit and those redemption rates slid, and like I said, 75% of that, so about $75 or so million went to the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy to support contaminated site cleanup. And this is actually the only funding source for contaminated site cleanup in the state.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So outside of potential appropriation from the state legislature, this is the only ongoing funding stream that the department has to clean up the over 26,000 contaminated sites. Michigan is a state with a lot of manufacturing and a lot of historic manufacturing, and that the legacy of that is a lot of pollution that taxpayers have to clean up. So one of the big benefits of this program is that if you're someone who didn't reclaim that 10 cents for yourself, 75% of that is going back to support your community, whether it's cleaning up a contaminated site or making sure the Detroit and Rouge rivers are cleaned up or protecting the Great Lakes. That's where that money is going.
What I love about this, and this is something that you've mentioned to me, is that our vision for a better bottle bill keeps the ethos of the bottle deposit system alive, and one of the ways it does that is through those unclaimed deposits. Those are the people's dimes being spent on things that the people want, right? Yeah. They want a cleaner environment, they want cleaner Great Lakes. It's things that directly benefit them. So I love that in this system, if you get your dime back through the bottle deposit system, you get your dime back, you get your money back. If you don't, you're still benefiting in some sort of way. I think that's a really great process there. And I'd imagine too that if our vision for a better bottle bill is successful, the number of bottles and cans expand. Hopefully the redemption rates expand too, but that's still ultimately, even if our redemption rate is 90+%, that's still millions of dollars, as you mentioned, being generated for cleanups, for recycling improvements. Well, we talked about a lot about the vision. We talked a lot of nuance. But I am curious, this is an episode that's airing a few months after our initial set. When we look to the future, we have a new Michigan legislature in place. It's a new session. They have new priorities. We have priorities of our own. Where do we, as an environmental movement, go around the bottle deposit system from here on out?
Yeah, the modernizing Michigan's bottle bill is still one of Michigan Environmental Council's top priorities. Regardless of the makeup of the legislature, we've seen over the last 20 years that regardless who's in power, this issue hasn't been able to get done. But with that said, the Michigan Environmental Council is starting out 2025 with a new process that probably hasn't happened before, with the attempt to reach out to every stakeholder that's involved in this issue, from the community level to the business folks to environmental groups, to recycling folks, to get their inputs, to get their understanding, to know what it is that they care about related to this program, what they see as problems or concerns or hindrances, things they might want to change, and have a real conversation, and that hopefully leads to a negotiation with these stakeholders on a modernized proposal. And so that's what we're working on this year. We're getting those stakeholders together, working through the different policy issues that everybody has. This is an incredibly complex issue when you actually get into the weeds of it and understanding who has some sort of stake in the game, so to speak. Yeah. And so that's what we're doing now, and we're hoping that at the conclusion of that stakeholder process that we have a proposal that we can take to the legislature. And if they don't do their job, then there's other avenues that we as the people of Michigan can take if we are interested in moving this forward, just like they did in 1976 when it passed. And so we're still working hard. We believe this is a really important and vital change that we need to make to a very successful program in the state to get it to where people are today, and how they're interacting with it today.
With that, thank you so much, Trent, for hopping on our podcast.
Bo. Appreciate you having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, for sure. And really appreciate you being on. And thank you to our audience as well for tuning in. We'll have links in the description that will get you to more resources around the bottle deposit system and our efforts around that. So feel free to click those if you're interested. And then a big thank you too to CalSec Incorporated, a B Corporation based in Kalamazoo. They're our lead sponsor for the Common Groundwater podcast. And as a B Corp, they're grounded in sustainability, so they're doing the good work from their end too. With that, we will see you all soon.